Chapter 11 The Safe House is Built. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days later, Wu Huairen helped Zhang Yi score 2 guns and 100 rounds of ammo. Sure, the price was a little steep, but Zhang Yi didn't sweat it. Having that kind of firepower gave him a serious confidence boost for what was coming. He also finalized the deal with Zhou Hairun for the meds he'd need, snagging 2 boxes of top-of-the-line imports. Another week zipped by. Wu Huairen called Zhang Yi, telling him the safe room was done to spec and ready for inspection, so Zhang Yi finally checked out of his hotel and drove back to Yuelu community. Wu Huairen personally showed Zhang Yi around. Stepping inside, Zhang Yi's eyes lit up. Zhanmeng Company lived up to its rep as a top-tier security firm. Their build speed and quality were flawless, just like he wanted. The whole place was armored with 4-inch thick steel plating, and from the outside, it looked completely normal. Wu Huairen patiently walked Zhang Yi through the upgrades. The ventilation system's military grade, filters out any toxic gases, so no one can gas you out. Plus, we completely redid the insulation using pro-grade materials from an Arctic research facility. On top of the fireplace you requested, it seals in 99.5% of the heat. Wu Huairen gave Zhang Yi a knowing smile. And to really lock things down, we installed a building-wide surveillance system. 300 cameras, covering every inch of every floor. Zhang Yi was floored, speechless. It just goes to show, money talks. You can buy services regular folks can't even dream of. He walked out onto the balcony, now a giant floor-to-ceiling window. Wu Huairen explained, the windows are bulletproof, blast-resistant, even tougher than the steel plating. Gives you natural light and lets you keep an eye on things. Zhang Yi was stoked with the safe room. Short of an army with heavy artillery, nobody was busting through. Even if the whole building collapsed, he'd be sitting pretty. I'm seriously impressed with the work you guys did, Zhang Yi said, grinning at Wu Huairen. Wu Huairen smiled back. He pulled out the paperwork for Zhang Yi to sign. All good? The final payment's due in 3 months. Zhang Yi nodded, still grinning. Absolutely. But there was no way he was paying the balance. The thought of getting a safe room worth nearly 100 million for just a 10 million deposit was pure gold. Zhang Yi sprawled out on the sofa, admiring his perfect setup. Then it hit him. He'd overlooked a huge detail: water. The source of life. Zhang Yi smacked his forehead. Seriously? How could I forget water? After the freeze, even with the brutal cold, you could melt ice for water. But we're talking -40 to -50 degrees out there. Stepping outside could be deadly. Zhang Yi wasn't leaving that kind of hole in his plan. He immediately hopped online and ordered 100 massive water storage containers. They'd hold over 130,000 gallons, enough for years. Plus, he could always raid the warehouse for bottled water later. Water problem officially solved. The delivery guy was on it. A few hours later, the containers were at Zhang Yi's door. Zhang Yi went down to the community gate and got the security guard, Uncle Yu, to let the delivery truck through. Seeing Zhang Yi hauling in more weird stuff, the neighbors started buzzing. Is Zhang Yi losing it? I know, right? Always buying the strangest things. Remember when they were renovating? I saw them hauling in steel plates, like, 4 inches thick. Maybe his brain short-circuited. Building a safe room, like in the movies. I've seen rich folks do that kind of thing on foreign shows. Talk about overkill. And now all these containers. Does he think Tianhai's gonna run out of water? LOL. Zhang Yi didn't bother arguing with the peanut gallery, he just smirked. They'd be eating their words when the freeze hit. He wasn't about to waste his breath explaining. They'd just think he was nuts and accuse him of spreading panic, and then he'd get arrested. The security guard, Uncle Yu, was chatting with his neighbor, Uncle Tang. Uncle Yu walked over, all smiles. Hey Xiao Zhang, what are you gonna do with all these buckets? Need a hand? I'm happy to help. Zhang Yi was touched by Uncle Yu's kindness. Uncle Yu was a vet and a total stand-up guy. He'd been the community security guard for over 10 years, always doing his job. In the last life, he'd given his last food to a starving mother and daughter and died of hunger himself. He was one of the few glimmers of humanity Zhang Yi had seen in the apocalypse. So Zhang Yi said, Uncle Yu, the weather's acting weird this year. I've got intel that this winter's gonna be a killer. Just to be safe, you should stock up on extra food and water. Beat the price hikes. Uncle Yu and Zhang Yi always got along. He knew Zhang Yi was a good-hearted dude and old folks always worry, so he furrowed his brow at Zhang Yi's warning. Xiao Zhang, seriously? You sure about this? Zhang Yi nodded. Look at me. I'm prepping like crazy. Stock up on ramen and bottled water. Can't go wrong. Uncle Yu nodded right away. He lived alone and always kept some ramen and sausage around anyway. Now that Zhang Yi had put the idea in his head, he'd make a point of grabbing more, figure it's cheap insurance. And it keeps forever, so no sweat. But Uncle Tang chimed in, Xiao Zhang, maybe don't go around saying stuff like that. Things are stable and peaceful. We're not gonna run out of stuff. Say that kind of thing, and someone might report you for spreading rumors. You'll be in hot water. Zhang Yi rolled his eyes, but didn't take the bait. He'd given them the heads up. It was their call whether to listen. Chapter 12 Evacuating a Warehouse Worth Hundreds of Millions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi had 100 giant-sized buckets delivered to his place, then he turned on every faucet in the house and started filling them up. At that rate, he figured he could have all 100 buckets full in a week. Tops. Days drifted by. Zhang Yi wasn't just sitting around, though. He spent every last cent he had. He ate every meal at the fanciest restaurant in town. Then, he'd buy tons of food from those same restaurants and stash it away in his pocket dimension. He also hit up the shooting range in Tianhai City every day, practicing with crossbows and firearms, trying to sharpen his skills. He knew he couldn't become a martial arts master in a month, but with a crossbow, a gun, and a super safe, metal-clad house, he wouldn't be afraid of anything. Of course, moves like that didn't go unnoticed, but everyone just thought Zhang Yi was off his rocker. They figured he'd lost it, and they all laughed behind his back. Even Fang Yuqing started keeping her distance, not wanting to be seen with him, and so, the days kept ticking by. Before he knew it, over 20 days had passed, and the end was just around the corner. Zhang Yi had already stockpiled a massive amount of supplies, including food, weapons, and heating equipment. Still, he didn't feel secure enough. He decided to raid the local Walmart mega warehouse. If he could pull that off, he'd have more supplies than he could use in 10 lifetimes. So, Zhang Yi went back to the warehouse and clocked in for his regular shift. Walmart warehouses ran 24/7, but there were only 10 people working the night shift. Zhang Yi decided to go with the simplest, most brutal plan: slip sleeping pills into their tea. Hey, the world was ending in less than a week anyway, so who was going to rat him out? Since he knew all these guys, it was easy. Once the pills kicked in, they were out cold. Zhang Yi strolled into the security room and shut down the cameras throughout the entire warehouse. Then, he headed into the warehouse itself. Staring at the massive space before him, Zhang Yi took a deep breath and started gathering supplies. All it took was a glance with his right eye, and the entire shelf would vanish into his pocket dimension with a thought. First, he hit the beverage section. Hundreds of thousands of tons of mineral water, soda, and liquor were stored there, including fancy wines and foreign booze. Zhang Yi didn't discriminate, he just packed it all into his warehouse. Before long, thousands of cubic meters of drinks had disappeared. Next up was the fuel section. There was tons of anthracite coal, plus barrels of gasoline and alcohol, all household-sized, for families or camping. There were tens of thousands of boxes of coal alone, not to mention the alcohol and gasoline. Zhang Yi couldn't use it all in 100 years. He took it all without hesitation, using his years of warehousing experience to organize it in his pocket dimension. That way, it'd be easier to find later. Third, he moved on to the food section. The quantities here were even bigger, tens of thousands of tons. Canned goods, pre-packaged roast chicken and duck, chips, ramen, gourmet snacks. Zhang Yi wasn't picky, he grabbed whatever he could get his hands on. After the food, he hit the sporting goods aisle. He needed those for his safe house, too. Even though space was limited in the house, he wasn't going to be shy about taking what he could. His pocket dimension had unlimited space, so he might as well. He also spotted some particularly useful items, like baseball bats and fencing gear, which made great weapons. During the collection process, Zhang Yi found some real treasures, like skiing and mountaineering equipment, including winter gear designed for Olympic athletes. This stuff could withstand temperatures of -100 degrees. Zhang Yi's eyes lit up. It was the ultimate cold weather protection for the coming ice age. Without hesitation, he grabbed dozens of the best winter outfits and sleeping bags he could find. After 2 solid hours, Zhang Yi had single-handedly emptied the entire Walmart warehouse, covering millions of square feet. Looking around at the vast, empty space, Zhang Yi felt a surge of satisfaction. Now, even if the worst ice age hit, he knew he could live comfortably, forever. Zhang Yi went back to his station, took a sip of his spiked tea, and passed out on his desk. Sometime later, he was shaken awake. "Hey, boss. Something big happened. Wake up." Zhang Yi blinked open his eyes and looked at his coworker, confused. "What's up?" The employee pointed a trembling finger at the warehouse. "Dude. The warehouse is empty." "What?" Zhang Yi slapped the table and stood up, acting surprised. He pretended to go to the warehouse, acting shocked by the empty scene. Zhang Yi knew exactly what had happened. Still, he faked weakness and said, his voice trembling, "What happened? Where did all the supplies go?" The other employees looked just as nervous. "Yeah, there had to be tens of millions of dollars worth of stuff in there. It would take days to haul it all out in trucks. How could it all just disappear?" Nobody mentioned taking a nap. After all, it was the night shift, and sneaking a few winks was pretty common. Zhang Yi paced back and forth, pretending to be anxious. Then he said, "This is too weird. We can't handle this. We have to call our superiors." Even though they were nervous, nobody was too worried. The scale of the situation meant that they couldn't be held responsible. Tens of millions of dollars in supplies vanishing in 2 hours was way beyond their pay grade. They made a few bucks an hour. They weren't going to bust their butts for the company, so, when Zhang Yi said that, everyone agreed. "Let the higher-ups deal with this mess." Zhang Yi immediately called the warehouse manager to break the news. The manager was completely freaked out, thinking it was some kind of joke. Chapter 13 The Ice Age Comes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi cleaned out the entire Walmart South China warehouse. He moved materials worth tens of billions into his personal dimension. Then, playing dumb, he immediately reported the incident to Walmart's higher-ups. The news quickly spread among the South China executives, and a shocked group of leaders rushed to the scene and called the police. Zhang Yi wasn't worried about getting caught. After all, the idea that tens of billions worth of goods vanished from a warehouse in just 2 hours was too far-fetched, even with a full-scale police investigation. They wouldn't figure it out anytime soon. Still, he pretended to be nervous and scared, cooperating with the police investigation. After a night of questioning, Zhang Yi was released. The police were also deeply suspicious. They reviewed the security footage inside and outside the warehouse. Even though the internal cameras were disabled, stealing millions of cubic meters of supplies without a trace seemed impossible. However, reviewing the external cameras revealed no vehicles coming or going. In other words, the tens of billions worth of supplies either disappeared into thin air, or, it was an inside job staged by Walmart itself. Logically, the latter seemed more plausible. After all, short of a supernatural event, there was no explaining how millions of cubic meters of material could vanish without a trace in just 2 hours. While they had some doubts about ordinary employees like Zhang Yi, the core problem of the missing goods remained unexplained. Even if internal staff were involved, they weren't the main issue. Zhang Yi was ordered to stay in Tianhai City and cooperate with the police and Walmart's internal investigation. He cooperated fully and was then released. Back home, Zhang Yi peeked through the blinds. Today was December 12th, with only 8 days left until the Ice Age. He just needed to stay put and relax, and he'd be set for life. Thinking of the tens of billions in value, practically everything he could need, safely stored in his dimension, Zhang Yi felt a wave of relief. He went back to the bedroom and lay down. He was tired after a busy night and police questioning. Zhang Yi slept until evening, then turned on the TV to see news reports about the Walmart South China warehouse theft. The sheer scale and strangeness of the theft had made it national news. A warehouse that size emptied in hours. Someone had to be on the inside. It was probably an inside job, maybe Walmart execs trying to commit insurance fraud. Millions of cubic meters of material. Even with semi-trucks, you couldn't haul that much in one night. Zhang Yi smiled. No one would know the real answer until the end of the world. Over the next few days, Zhang Yi stayed home. He knew time was running out for the world. He wouldn't leave his apartment unless absolutely necessary. Investigators from the police and Walmart headquarters called him in for more questioning. They still suspected something was off about Zhang Yi that night, but with limited investigation time and no hard evidence, suspicion wasn't enough to arrest him. Acquaintances messaged him, trying to get the inside scoop, but Zhang Yi played it cool. Finally, December 12th arrived. Gamma rays passed through the planet at 2 in the morning. The pass was brief, but the impact was devastating. Zhang Yi had sealed off his apartment hours earlier and lit a fire in the fireplace. Soon, air conditioning and heating would be useless as the power grid failed. The only options for warmth would be the most primitive methods. At 2 o'clock, he sat on the sofa in front of the large windows, holding a beer, staring outside. Suddenly, a white light flashed across the sky. It was midnight, but the earth brightened as if at dusk. The light lasted only 2 seconds, then faded. Most people were asleep and didn't notice the fleeting change, but Zhang Yi knew what it meant, and his back went cold. He gulped down his beer, the refreshing Budweiser calming him slightly. He tossed a few more pieces of wood into the fireplace. Turning on the TV, he waited for the world to change. A few minutes later, snowflakes started to fall. At first, they were small, but in under 2 minutes, they became huge. The wind howled, and the snow seemed to instantly become terrifying. Heavy snow fell over the entire city. Nature doesn't give you a heads up when it changes. Zhang Yi started to feel nervous. His safe house was perfect, but having lived through the icy apocalypse once, he couldn't help but worry. Could the 800 million yuan safe house withstand the coming temperature drop? The flames in the fireplace roared, and the room grew warm, even a little hot. Zhang Yi checked the temperature inside. It was 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, the city was being buried under snow. Zhang Yi felt a little better, but he wouldn't fall asleep yet. He needed to watch for further changes. There would be plenty of time to rest later. In less than an hour, a thick layer of snow had accumulated on the balcony. Zhang Yi checked the news on his phone and found reports of the temperature plummeting. The internet was full of complaints. People were whining about winter coming early and not having their winter clothes ready. This weather is insane. It's below zero. The roads are going to be icy tomorrow. How am I going to get to work? Others were happy. So much snow. I don't have to go to work tomorrow. Southerners were posting excited photos of themselves in the snow, marveling at how much snow there was. Zhang Yi shook his head. This was just the beginning. 3 months of heavy snow lay ahead, and the temperature would keep dropping. They wouldn't be so happy to see the snow then. Chapter 14. Extremely low temperature. I laugh at the outside world. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Ice Age had begun. A heavy snowfall hit Tianhai City in the south, setting off a flurry of online chatter. Some people griped, others celebrated, but none of them realized this wasn't just a passing storm. It was the start of something far bigger, something devastating. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi was chilling at home, stretched out on his couch in the safe room, enjoying a comfy 85 degrees while sipping on an ice-cold Budweiser. Life was good. Then his phone buzzed. He picked it up and saw it was a group chat filled with his former classmates, friends, and neighbors. OMG, why is it snowing so much? The weather forecast said nothing about this. I woke up freezing in the middle of the night. Had to crank up the heat. Dude, our AC's barely doing anything. It's been getting colder and colder all morning. How long is this freeze gonna last? I haven't even bought winter clothes yet. Everyone was in a panic, venting their shock, but Zhang Yi could tell most people weren't taking it seriously yet, just a little surprised. He knew better. He yawned, not wanting to read any more. Back in his warm bed, Zhang Yi snuggled under a velvet comforter and closed his eyes. His bed was top of the line, a fancy piece he'd grabbed from a Walmart warehouse, especially the mattress. Supposedly the same one some actress had, worth like a cool $1,000,000. Outside, the snow was coming down thick, the wind was howling, and the fireplace inside was blazing. keeping the temperature perfect. In this cozy haven, Zhang Yi was out like a light. The next morning, his phone's ringtone dragged him awake. He saw it was White Lotus Fong Yuqing calling. Roused from a perfect dream, Zhang Yi was not a happy camper. He answered, a little pissed off, yeah. What's so important you gotta call me this early? Fong Yuqing paused, catching his frosty tone, but she pressed on, Zhang Yi, it's freezing out there. Did you know this was coming when you stocked up on supplies? Her voice was shaky, like she was holding back. Zhang Yi smirked. Of course, the White Lotus wanted something, he drawled. Heard it from a friend, just in passing. Didn't think it would get this bad. He tossed back the covers. The room was so warm he was practically sweating. Zhang Yi slipped on his slippers and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the scene. The heavy snow had swallowed the city. You couldn't even see the street or the bushes, just the faint outlines of buildings, with the first floors of many already underwater, and it was still coming down, those fat flakes falling without end. On the other end of the phone, Fong Yuqing was still going, figures you'd keep something like this to yourself. You really didn't think to tell me? Zhang Yi frowned, surprised she had the nerve to complain. He hung up and tossed the phone aside, then he headed to the bathroom for a hot shower. Afterward, he pulled out a prime cut of A5 Wagyu beef from storage and whipped up steak and pasta for breakfast. While he ate, he flipped on the TV. The power was still on, for now, so he could watch the news, even if it went out. Zhang Yi had all sorts of backup power, generators, and enough gas to last him for decades. As far as energy went, he was set for like 300 years. He tuned to the morning news channel. He already knew what was happening, but it was still interesting to see how it was playing out. The two anchors were bundled up in thick down jackets. These were TV people. They never skimped on the central AC, and the station was always a priority for power. If they were wearing down jackets, it meant the temperature had dropped so low the AC couldn't keep up. The female anchor looked straight at the camera and tried to keep her voice steady. Last night, a massive cold front swept across the globe, causing a dramatic drop in temperatures. The average drop was between 126 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The meteorological department is investigating the cause. In the coming days, we urge everyone to stay warm and avoid frostbite. If you don't have to go out, please stay home. Authorities are working to resolve the situation, and we urge everyone not to panic. Do not spread or believe rumors, and do not hoard supplies. This snowstorm will pass soon. Zhang Yi snorted. After the Ice Age started, it was every man for himself. Anyone who stayed home and did nothing was going to be the first to go. In the corner of the screen, it said the temperature in Tianhai City was -85 degrees Fahrenheit. Yesterday the high had been 59 degrees. That was almost a 145-degree drop. Zhang Yi shrugged. It was playing out exactly like his past life, but here he was in pajamas, drinking red wine, eating steak and pasta, not feeling the cold at all. That's what you got when you spend a fortune on a safe house, with extra attention to insulation. The temperature inside hardly fluctuated. Then his phone buzzed again. He was curious to see what his neighbors, the ones who laughed at him before, were saying now. First thing he saw was a message from Fong Yuqing. Zhang Yi, why did you hang up on me? It's snowing like crazy out here, I can't even leave. You bought so much food, can you lend me some? I'll pay you back when this is over. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow, a sneer creeping across his face. The White Lotus had her angle. She knew food was going to be worth a fortune. She didn't want to risk stepping out into that sub-zero weather, so she was trying to score food off Zhang Yi. But Zhang Yi knew this glacial disaster was going to drag on forever. It wasn't just a snowstorm, and there was no way he was giving Fong Yuqing a single bite. In his past life, he'd been fooled by her and given away tons of his supplies, and she'd ended up betraying him, even poaching his ribs to make soup. He wanted to play with this woman, then watch her die a slow, miserable death. He smirked and typed a reply. You should have thought about that earlier. I've almost eaten through all my supplies already. Check out the steak I just made for breakfast. He snapped a selfie with his steak and red wine, making sure to include his pajama-clad self. Then he sent it to Fong Yuqing. Chapter 15 White Lotus begging for supplies. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fang Yuqing was huddled in her small apartment, wrapped in two thick quilts. Even with the AC cranked up to 104 degrees, the temperature inside barely scraped above freezing. She shivered, convinced icy drafts were seeping into the bedding. When Zhang Yi's photo popped up on her phone, her eyes went wide. She couldn't believe that in weather this brutal, he was lounging around in thin pajamas, chowing down on steak and washing it down with Red Bull. They lived in the same building, for crying out loud. It felt like they were living in completely different realities. Seeing that juicy steak and a bottle of fancy red wine on the table, Fang Yuqing practically drooled. Being the high-maintenance girl she was, she recognized quality when she saw it. That steak, she was sure, was genuine, top-grade Wagyu beef, and the French red wine. Definitely from some famous vineyard, costing at least 10 to 20,000. Here she was, freezing her butt off, while Zhang Yi was living the high life. Jealousy twisted in her gut. She immediately texted Zhang Yi. "Ugh, that looks amazing. I want steak and wine too." She thought her hint was pretty obvious. The old Zhang Yi would have jumped at the chance to play hero and deliver steak and wine to her door, but Zhang Yi just smirked when he saw her message. Did she still think he was her personal doormat? He replied slowly, "If you want some, go buy it yourself." Fang Yuqing's face froze when she read his reply. Was he serious? It was 10 below zero outside, and any exposed skin was at risk of frostbite. How could he expect such a thing from a delicate flower like her? Fang Yuqing gritted her teeth. "Zhang Yi, you're such a jerk. You don't even know how to take advantage of an opportunity when it's handed to you." But even now, Fang Yuqing still had some pride left. Sure, she desperately wanted that steak and high-end wine. But in her mind, Zhang Yi was just another fish in her sea of admirers. Besides, she figured the blizzard would blow over in a few days, so, she stubbornly clung to her image as an unattainable goddess and refused to directly beg Zhang Yi for food. Zhang Yi ignored Fang Yuqing and moved on to other chat groups, ready to watch the drama unfold. He checked out the building's resident group and saw Aunt Lin from the Homeowners Association urging everyone to stay calm and stay inside. "Everyone, don't panic. It's just a cold snap. It'll pass in a couple of days, tops. Don't go out hoarding supplies. Trust the authorities. The Homeowners Association will do everything we can to help you get through this snowstorm. Please follow our instructions and don't make trouble." Some residents raised concerns. With snow this heavy, who knows when it will stop? It's too risky to go out now, but how can we get by without stocking up? Exactly. Why don't you go out and buy some vegetables for us? I bet prices are going to skyrocket in the next few days. Aunt Lin's tone sharpened. What are you doing? Are you trying to undermine us? Hoarding will only drive up prices, and everyone will end up paying more. If I find out anyone is hoarding supplies, I'll report them to the authorities for spreading panic. Zhang Yi watched Aunt Lin bossing everyone around and smirked. It was only the first day of the Ice Age, and because of the extreme cold, people hadn't yet completely ransacked the supermarkets. Going out in the snow at this time was risky, but it was definitely possible to stock up on some essentials. But thanks to Aunt Lin's intimidation, many people were taking their chances and staying put. He could only imagine how that would end. Just then, Aunt Lin turned her attention to Zhang Yi. She knew him from the residence group. "Xiao Zhang, you stocked up a lot of stuff at home before. Don't set a bad example now. Stay home these next few days. If I see you out shopping again, don't expect any sympathy from me." Zhang Yi's expression darkened. That busybody had been holding a grudge ever since he refused to help her with something last time. Now she saw an opportunity to use him as an example. Too bad for her. Aunt Lin's threats meant nothing to Zhang Yi anymore. He sneered and replied, "Aunt Lin, nobody knows how long this storm will last. If it goes on for a while and people run out of food, will you take responsibility?" Zhang Yi's question voiced the concerns of many. Everyone was unhappy with Aunt Lin's pronouncements, but they hesitated to speak up because of her position. With Zhang Yi leading the charge, others joined in. "Yeah, if we can't stock up, who's going to be responsible if we run out of food? Will you take the blame?" Aunt Lin started to panic when she saw the residents united against her. She also hated Zhang Yi even more. how dare he publicly contradict her in the residence group. It was a slap in the face. Don't worry, the Homeowners Association assures you that there will be no shortage of supplies. The storm will pass soon. And you, Zhang Yi, don't try to stir up trouble. You're violating the law. Curled up at home, Aunt Lin gritted her teeth and muttered, that Zhang Yi really needs to be taught a lesson. I'll find a way to have him detained for a few days. Zhang Yi laughed out loud. Even now, that old woman was trying to throw her weight around and act like a tyrant. Whoa, that's a heavy accusation. Don't worry, it's so cold outside that even if you begged me, I wouldn't leave the house. Do whatever you want. He had already stocked up, so there was no need to fight the crowds at the supermarket for scraps. But those who believed Aunt Lin's nonsense were in for a rude awakening. Zhang Yi couldn't help but think about how many people were going to freeze and starve to death. But some people deserved their fate, like those neighbors who betrayed him in his previous life, whether they lived or died. Zhang Yi had made up his mind to focus on himself. What did he care about the fate of everyone else? Chapter 16 Aunt Lin's Retaliation. Zhang Yi straight out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi plopped down on the couch and let out a bored yawn. While other people were freezing and starving, he was living the high life. His place had the best insulation system and a practically endless fuel supply, enough to keep his safe house at a comfortable, consistent temperature year-round. He didn't have to do anything except kick back and enjoy himself. But there was nothing good on TV. All the live broadcasts were down because of the extreme cold. His favorite streamers weren't exactly doing their thing in sub-zero temps. He smirked. Props to anyone doing that in weather like this. He accessed his personal pocket dimension, full of game consoles and all the latest AAA titles in the electronics section, PS5s, Switches, Xboxes, hundreds of them, all brand new and still in the box, and the game cartridges. Tens of thousands. Zhang Yi grabbed a fresh PS5, hooked it up to the massive 100-inch Sony TV, and started gaming. He fired up Bayonetta Witch 3, this year's hottest action game. He also had Elden Ring, The Witcher 3, and Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice on deck, all great choices for killing time. And if he wanted something with some serious staying power, he could always dive into a game like Civilization or City Skylines and lose himself for days. No need to worry about work or relationships. This was better than pre-apocalypse life. Since he was home, he was just in his pajamas, playing games and munching on snacks, living the dream. Then his phone rang. It was Aunt Lin from the HOA, stirring up trouble in the group chat. Zhang Yi, the roads are snowed in. Get your shovel and come help clear them. That it was more of a command than a request. Zhang Yi noticed she'd asked everyone in the group to help, but almost nobody responded, so, naturally, she came after him. He glanced out the window at the snow, which was piled so high it almost covered the first floor. Shoveling 3 meters of snow by hand was a pipe dream. Besides, he knew the snow was going to keep falling for at least 3 more months. Any shoveling he did now would be pointless. It's way too cold to be out there. I'd freeze into a popsicle, Zhang Yi replied. We gotta wait for it to stop. A few others chimed in. Yeah, it's like 70 below out there. We'll get frostbite in 5 minutes. This isn't the North Pole, we don't have the right gear to be doing that. Aunt Lin got flustered. What's with the attitude? We're doing this for everyone, not just for me. You're young and strong. You can't just sit around while other people are working. Then she focused her ire on Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, I'm ordering you to go shovel snow, on behalf of the HOA. This is a crisis. We have to unite and follow the organization. Anyone who opposes me is opposing the leadership of the HOA. The organization will remember this after the snow stops. Aunt Lin was really laying it on thick. The other residents immediately clammed up. It was still early days in the snowstorm, and people were hesitant to openly defy authority. The people in these neighborhood committees might not seem that important, but they were in charge of stuff that affected everyone's daily life, so people usually didn't mess with them. Everyone kept quiet. Nobody wanted to be the first to make waves, but they were also hoping Zhang Yi would go off on Aunt Lin, fight their battles for them. Zhang Yi knew exactly what these cowards were thinking. He rolled his eyes. no way he was letting this slide, time to burn this bridge. He scrolled back through the chat logs and saw that Aunt Lin was only targeting the young people who usually went along with whatever she said, the troublesome neighbors and the rich ones got a pass. Aunt Lin's right, the HOA should lead the way, Zhang Yi wrote. And you're young and strong too, right? There are tons of people in this complex, why are you only calling out a few of us? You think we're easy targets? You didn't tag any of the tough guys or the trust fund kids. What, can't get a word in with them, that the other residents were loving it. Zhang Yi, you're saying what we're all thinking. Yeah, why not ask Chen Zhenghao or Su Hao, not everyone knew who those guys were, they all lived in the same complex, and their reputations preceded them. Chen Zhenghao, from 601 on the 6th floor, was a local gangster who ran construction crews and had 100 guys working for him, and Su Hao, from 802 on the 8th floor, was the son of a big-time real estate developer with connections in city government. Aunt Lin hadn't mentioned either of them once. Zhang Yi had called her out on her bullying, and she was not happy. The reason she didn't go after those guys was because she was afraid of them. Aunt Lin only went after the easy targets. If Zhang Yi had acted like this before, she wouldn't have bothered asking him to shovel. She felt humiliated, and started sending a bunch of angry voice messages in the group chat. Snow removal is a public service. It's for the good of everyone. Some people are just too selfish to care about anything but themselves. People like that are a disgrace to this community. If you don't want to help, fine. Plenty of other people will. Some people are more dedicated to the community than others. And I'm not picking on anyone. I just didn't want to tag everyone individually. Don't twist my words. Don't make me call the cops. Aunt Lin was digging herself into a hole, threatening to call the cops. Zhang Yi burst out laughing. It wasn't like anything was functioning normally in this society. Hearing Aunt Lin's rant, the more timid residents were already grabbing their shovels and heading out to clear the snow, but Zhang Yi wasn't scared. Aside from the fact that her demands were ridiculous, the cops weren't going to take her side anyway. He was pretty sure none of the authorities were functioning normally, right? Chapter 17. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi didn't give a rat's ass about what Aunt Lin said, but he was bored, so he figured he'd mess with the old lady. Oh, Aunt Lin, you're really full of yourself. If you're so powerful, why don't you go ask Chen Zhenghao and Su Hao to come downstairs and shovel the snow? That he called them out by name in the group, not caring about stepping on any toes. Chen Zhenghao, aka Brother Hao, was a known thug around town. He was the one leading the charge with a mountain axe when they broke into his place. Su Hao, the arrogant, spoiled rich kid, was the first to jump Zhang Yi. Basically, aside from a few decent folks, the rest of these neighbors were in on the attack or robbery against Zhang Yi. He could even bet that after he died in his past life, they each got a cut of the spoils. So Zhang Yi wasn't about to play nice. He ripped off their masks to expose them for what they were, hoping it would get under their skin. Aunt Lin checked her phone, and her expression instantly soured. Zhang Yi calling them out put her in a tough spot. Frankly, if she chickened out now, she'd become the laughingstock. And no one would listen to a word she said ever again. She had no choice but to bring Chen Zhenghao and Su Hao into the group. Folks, this community is our home, and it takes all of us to deal with this snow. I hope those who are free can grab some tools and help out. A few seconds later, Chen Zhenghao, using the ID 25 #602, dropped a bunch of question marks. Then, he posted a voice message. Shovel snow. Shovel your own damn snow. Are you blind? Didn't you see how much snow is still out there? Seriously, is there something wrong with your head? If you're sick, go to the hospital and stop barking like a dog. I swear, I'll kill you. Chen Zhenghao laid into Aunt Lin, without caring that she's an elder. Hearing this, the other residents in the group were practically rolling on the floor laughing. Aunt Lin thought she was somebody, but nobody took her seriously. Some small-time neighborhood committee member only has a little pull with regular homeowners. People in his circle don't care about her at all. The rich kid Su Hao also sent a voice message. Shoveling snow ain't my problem. I don't need to work, so it doesn't matter if I sleep in every day. After saying that, he posted a picture of himself lounging under thick covers with a woman in his arms. Su Hao only bought this place to stash his mistress, and it looked like he was stuck there too. When Aunt Lin asked him to shovel snow, he figured the woman had lost her mind. Aunt Lin was so thoroughly chewed out by Chen Zhanghao that she didn't dare talk back. She wasn't about to mess with a real hard case. But seeing Su Hao being so provocative, she stood her ground and said, "You're still a resident here. Shoveling snow is your responsibility." Su Hao scoffed, "Please. I pay property taxes every month. What do you think that's for? Without my money, you people on the neighborhood committee would starve to death. Damn, taking the homeowner's money every day to act like a boss, and even treat yourself as the owner. Funny. None of those rich kids are dummies." Even though Su Hao was a layabout, he'd seen the world. He wouldn't give the little neighborhood committee ant a second thought. After he finished speaking, he taunted proudly. "I am where I am today because of my parents and my family's connections. Can't compare to you poor people. Hurry up, those of you who want to shovel snow, you still have to go out to earn money for food. After shoveling the snow, I can leave this ghost place." Everyone was furious when they heard Su Hao's arrogant words, but they couldn't really argue. Who asked them to be born into better circumstances? As harsh as the words were, they were true. The argument between Chen Zhanghao and Su Hao completely killed everyone's spirit. Aunt Lin's words were useless, and no one paid attention to it. Aunt Lin was furious, but she wasn't angry with Chen Zhanghao and Su Hao in her heart, but angry with Zhang Yi. She felt that she had succeeded in mobilizing the owners, and it was Zhang Yi, the shit-stirring stick, who ruined her. So she sent a private message to Zhang Yi, and asked very angrily, "Zhang Yi, are you deliberately trying to make things difficult for me? Tell me what you want to do. I asked everyone to go out to sweep the snow. Does everyone need to go out? It's all right now, everyone is quitting. Are we going to stay locked at home forever?" Zhang Yi frowned. Wow, someone actually came to his door to give him a piece of their mind. Don't you fucking pretend to be garlic for me. It's not a thing to bully the weak and fear the hard. Why are you still here? You don't even dare to fart when you are scolded by others. You came to me to find a sense of existence, right? Tell you, your grandpa is not easy to bully. Bark at me again, be careful that I will kill you. Zhang Yi had a good handle on Aunt Lin's personality. She was just a bully who knew how to push around those weaker than her. Sure enough, after Zhang Yi gave her such a harsh talking to, Aunt Lin was terrified. She was just an old woman living with her grandson, and it was because of her position on the neighborhood committee that people gave her the time of day. But if someone didn't care about her title and went after her, she wouldn't stand a chance. She didn't dare say anything right away, as if she was afraid of really making Zhang Yi mad. Aunt Lin quickly blocked Zhang Yi, worried that he might start yelling again. Her body was shaking, and she didn't know whether it was from the cold or the fear Zhang Yi had instilled. That bastard. He's just a jerk, crazy. I won't mess with him now, but just wait, I have plenty of ways to make his life miserable. Aunt Lin thought to herself that in the future, she would use her position on the neighborhood committee to make things difficult for Zhang Yi. For example, when handing out supplies, she'd make sure to keep Zhang Yi waiting, or if there were any good community events, she wouldn't tell Zhang Yi. She imagined Zhang Yi's remorse at that time, and even pictured him coming to beg her to let him off the hook, but she'd slam the door in his face and say, "Weren't you so arrogant? Now how do you like it?" Thinking about it, Aunt Lin smiled gleefully. Hey, sooner or later, you'll be begging me. I don't even know you as well now. Aunt Lin was satisfied with this way of mentally defeating him. Then she continued to run into the group to mobilize others to go out and sweep the snow. Although the big guy looks down on Aunt Lin very much, however, most people have to go out to work in the future. Considering the problem of their own travel, there are still some honest people who take tools and brave the severe cold of -70 degrees to go out to sweep snow. Zhang Yi didn't expect that Aunt Lin just scolded and ran away, and someone came to make trouble over there. This time, his WeChat call was called. He glanced at the profile picture. It was Chen Zhanghao from the group. It seems that just now Zhang Yi talked about him in the group, which made him feel uncomfortable, so he called to Scare Zhang Yi originally held resentment towards this bastard, but when he saw him calling, he immediately narrowed his eyes. Now, he really hopes that this short-sighted thing will come and trouble him. After all, it is impossible for Zhang Yi to get out of this safe house, but if anyone dares to come here to find trouble, he has a lot of means to make that person die a very miserable death. So Zhang Yi connected the phone. Chapter 18. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as the call connected, a torrent of nasty insults exploded from the other end. Are you looking for a death wish? Who told you to run your mouth about me in the group? Messing with me, Qin Zhenghao? You little punk must have a death wish. I've got 100 ways to run you out of this city. You hear me? Qin Zhenghao was a notorious thug in Tianhai City, rumored to have offed a few people, with a whole crew of goons backing him up. People in his building gave him a wide berth, nobody wanted to cross him. He built his reputation on making anyone who even slightly disrespected him pay, and pay big. That was the social code he lived by. So even Zhang Yi's mere mention of him in the owner's group was enough for Qin Zhenghao to see red. You've got a big mouth, huh? He snarled into the phone. I'm gonna use you as an example. Zhang Yi wasn't about to back down. What, you think you're some kind of kingpin? He shot back. Quit acting tough, you social parasite, you waste of space. You're nothing but a flunky. Zhang Yi laid into him, a wave of satisfaction washing over him. He'd been waiting to unleash this rage on the guy who'd led the home invasion and killed him in his past life. Qin Zhenghao was shocked that Zhang Yi was talking back. He doubled down, spewing even more vile abuse. You're all talk. Zhang Yi yelled. Who are you trying to scare? Go suck a lemon. That he hung up and blocked the number, picturing Qin Zhenghao's face and feeling a thrill of satisfaction. He walked over to the TV and turned on the security cameras. Zhanlong Security had rigged the whole floor with surveillance when they built the safe room. He had eyes on the entire building now. Zhang Yi watched the 6th floor, and sure enough, Qin Zhenghao's door was thrown open almost instantly. He stormed out, wearing a down jacket and brandishing a baseball bat. The guy immediately regretted his outfit in the sub-zero cold. It was way below zero outside, and he was trying to look tough in just a down jacket and a t-shirt. Unzipping the jacket to flash his chest tattoo, the freezing temperature was not kind to his theatrics. Finding the coast was clear, Qin Zhenghao rubbed his hands together, then hustled into the elevator. Zhang Yi settled onto the sofa and casually picked up a crossbow from under the coffee table. It was a hunting crossbow, powerful enough to sink a 20 centimeters bolt into a 600-pound wild boar. He chuckled, loading a bolt with practiced ease. He'd gotten good with this thing. At less than 50 feet, he could nail a watermelon-sized target every time. The elevator climbed, and Zhang Yi moved to the door, crossbow loaded. His reinforced security door had special shooting ports built into the upper part. Zhang Yi stood on a chair and opened the panel covering one of the shooting ports. It only opened from the inside. He aimed the crossbow at the corridor, just in case. He slipped his pistol into his pocket. Qin Zhenghao was walking into a world of hurt. Soon, the elevator dinged, and Qin Zhenghao stomped toward the apartment, cursing all the way. He'd gotten Zhang Yi's address from the owner's group chat. He reached the door and started pounding on it with the baseball bat, bellowing, Zhang Yi, come out here, you son of a bitch. What happened to your tough talk from earlier? I dare you to show your face. I'm gonna kill you. Qin Zhenghao hammered at the door, but the security door was built with bulletproof metal and was several inches thick. It could withstand more than a tank. He couldn't make a dent, but his hands throbbed with pain from the impacts. Oblivious to the crossbow pointed directly at him, Qin Zhenghao kept shouting and swinging. Zhang Yi smirked as he watched the guy's display. The crossbow bolt was aimed at Qin Zhenghao's head. But then he paused and reconsidered. In this apocalyptic world, everyone else in the building, except for him, was as good as dead. That included Qin Zhenghao. Killing him right away seemed too easy. After all, these neighbors had eaten him alive in his previous life. A wicked grin spread across Zhang Yi's face. He wouldn't let the bastard off that easy. Zhang Yi shifted his aim. There was a faint whoosh, and the bolt slammed into Qin Zhenghao's leg. The crossbow arrow, powerful enough to take down a wild boar, pierced straight through his calf. Qin Zhenghao shrieked and collapsed to the floor, clutching his leg and howling in agony, a penetrating wound in -70 degrees. Chen Zhenghao's leg was as good as ruined, and without medicine, infection was a certainty. His death would be slow, agonizing, and cold. Writhing in pain, Chen Zhenghao realized he had crossed a seriously bad guy. These thugs rely on being crazy enough to take the consequences and not fear for their lives. They bank on their victims being too scared to fight back, but when they run into someone who isn't afraid to use a crossbow, they lose their nerve. Chen Zhenghao was terrified, not even able to see where the arrow had come from, but he was a survivor, so he hobbled back toward the elevator on his ruined leg. Zhang Yi didn't fire another shot. He wanted Chen Zhenghao to suffer. He wasn't a monster, after all. By the time Chen Zhenghao reached the elevator, he was drenched in sweat that instantly turned to ice in the frigid air, but the ice outside was nothing compared to the fear in his heart. The cold, ruthless attack had made him feel the killing intent up close and personal. Anyone who dared to use a crossbow on another human being wasn't someone to mess with. Chen Zhenghao stared at his leg, his calf completely impaled. Blood soaked his pant leg and quickly froze. The extreme cold dulled the pain somewhat. But that didn't comfort Chen Zhenghao. It terrified him. He knew that if he didn't get medical attention immediately, his leg wouldn't last an hour. Chapter 19. I'll give you an ice bath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Zhenghao finally felt a pang of fear. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. He tried for over 2 minutes, just getting a busy signal. Chen Zhenghao's heart sank. It was freezing out, and everything was practically shut down. Even if some hospitals were still running, ambulances wouldn't be able to get through the snow-clogged streets. Chen Zhenghao was a tough guy. After a long pause, he decided to operate on himself. He needed to get that bolt out, at the very least. After a painful trip home, he pulled out a knife, alcohol lamp, gauze, and some blood-stopping powder from a drawer. He got into fights often enough that he kept these things on hand. Chen Zhenghao sliced open his pants leg, and his face paled when he saw the wound. The extreme cold had frozen the wound that had stopped the bleeding, for now, but the surrounding area was turning purple, and his calf was completely numb. Hope dwindled. He knew he was on his own. Luckily, he was a hardened guy. After thinking it through, he began the operation. The frostbite on his calf dulled the pain, so, even without anesthesia, he got the job done. But the pain was so intense that he nearly blacked out, and his calf was clearly beyond saving. Chen Zhenghao lay on the sofa, gasping, and seething with hatred for Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, you little punk, I'm gonna kill you, I swear. His eyes burned with murderous intent. He wasn't kidding. He truly intended to kill Zhang Yi. How else could he maintain his rep in Tianhai City? Chen Zhenghao grabbed his phone. Zhang Yi had blocked him, so he had to go through the homeowners group chat. Zhang Yi, you son of a bitch, just you wait. If I don't kill you, I'll change my name. The other homeowners were clueless about what was happening, but hearing that Zhang Yi had crossed Chen Zhenghao, they felt a chill for him. Chen Zhenghao was a real thug, a stone-cold killer. If they knew Zhang Yi had shot him with an arrow and crippled his leg, they'd be too scared to breathe. Some people, however, were thrilled, like Aunt Lin, who'd been humiliated by Zhang Yi before. It's good for dogs to fight, they're both trash. I hope that gangster Chen Zhenghao beats Zhang Yi to a pulp. Teach that damn thing to disrespect me. Fang Yuqing also saw the news. She smirked, hoping Chen Zhenghao would take care of Zhang Yi. Why else would he be such a jerk to her, acting as if she wasn't worthy of his respect? No one in the group dared to speak up, afraid of getting involved. Zhang Yi burst out laughing when he saw the message. As long as he stayed inside his apartment, he didn't care about 100 Chen Zhenghaos. Zhang Yi sent a voice message. Who do you think you are? All bark and no bite. Mess with me again, and I'll cripple your other leg. The group erupted. They couldn't believe Zhang Yi had the guts to talk back to Chen Zhenghao. And apparently, one of Chen Zhenghao's legs was messed up. Chen Zhenghao gripped his phone so hard he almost broke it. Zhang Yi, you bastard, you're dead. Zhang Yi shot back, come get me, tough guy. See who drops first. After the apocalypse, Zhang Yi was living life to the fullest, without worrying about laws or what others thought. He didn't have to be nice to anyone. It was awesome. Back at Chen Zhanghao's place, he was fuming. After getting home, he slowly regained consciousness, thanks to the weak heat from the air conditioner, but the pain in his leg was agonizing. Now, he could only hobble around with crutches. After thinking carefully, Chen Zhanghao decided killing Zhang Yi wouldn't be that hard. He figured he'd been shot because he wasn't paying attention. Now that he knew what to expect, he could call his boys, storm Zhang Yi's place, and beat him to death. It was freezing out, and the cops and hospitals were shut down. If you wanted to kill someone, now was the time. Chen Zhanghao called his crew and told them to bring their weapons and help him take out Zhang Yi. Most of them lived nearby. After getting the order, they grabbed their machetes, bats, and pipes and headed to Chen Zhanghao's place. Seeing Chen Zhanghao leg, they all vowed to beat the guy to death, avenging their boss. Chen Zhanghao said coldly, "I'll be fine. The snow will melt in a few days, and I can get it patched up at the hospital. But this bastard dared to shoot me, it won't go unpunished. If I let this slide, what kind of man will I be?" One of his guys said, "Bro, how, just tell us what unit he's in, and we'll chop him up right now." Chen Zhanghao nodded. "He's in 2401, but the guy's tricky and has a crossbow. That's how he got me." Another guy raised his pipe and shouted, "That's a cheap move. He's using weapons like a coward." Chen Zhanghao said, "Be careful when you go up there. I know he's the only one in the apartment. Just don't let him get a shot off. Break down the door and take him out." Chen Zhanghao's crew were all desperate. Even though they knew Zhang Yi was armed, they weren't scared. In fact, they were pumped. With the city snowed in and the law gone, they could beat someone up in broad daylight. The dark side of human nature was unleashed, so they grabbed their weapons and headed for Zhang Yi's place, ready to break in. Zhang Yi knew Chen Zhanghao wouldn't let it go and would come for revenge, but he wasn't worried. He was at home, playing a game, while keeping an eye on the entire building on a split screen. He saw Chen Zhanghao's goons coming. The table in front of him was loaded with gear, ready to give them a warm welcome. These guys deserved to die, and Zhang Yi wouldn't show them any mercy. Soon, a dozen of Chen Zhanghao's guys were at Zhang Yi's door. Knowing Zhang Yi had a crossbow, they were careful. Some of them held up wooden planks as shields. After making sure the coast was clear, they went to work. "Open up. You idiot, daring to shoot our brother how? We'll teach you a lesson today. Next year at this time will be your death anniversary. Open the door." While yelling, they started smashing Zhang Yi's door with hammers and iron bars. They wanted to break in, beat Zhang Yi senseless, and drag him back to Chen Zhanghao. Zhang Yi kept playing his game. He was stuck on the first boss, dying 7 or 8 times. He was already in a bad mood. Hearing the yelling and banging, Zhang Yi yelled angrily, "Is that all you got? You hit like babies." That just pissed off the goons, and they attacked even harder. But the alloy security door, 8 inches thick, was tough to crack. Even with explosives, their primitive methods weren't doing much. After a while, a few small white spots appeared on the metal, and the paint was peeling. They couldn't even dent the door. The goons were stunned. "Damn, this door is made of solid metal. And it's so thick. How are we gonna break it down? This guy must have a lot of enemies." They were speechless, but they had promised Chen Zhanghao they'd beat Zhang Yi half to death and bring him back. Now, they couldn't break the door, and they couldn't go back empty-handed. So, they kept banging, smashing, and yelling outside the door. Zhang Yi's character died again. He finally snapped. He went to the kitchen, hooked up a hose to the faucet, and climbed up to the peephole. The goons outside didn't notice. They were still barking like dogs. Zhang Yi smirked, then turned on the faucet and sprayed them. The water gushed like a monsoon in the narrow corridor, instantly drenching them. Chapter 20. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Can you even picture what it would feel like to have ice water dumped on you when it's 70 below? Zhang Yi grabbed a big water hose and blasted the guys outside his door. The temperature difference between inside and outside was around 100 degrees, so the water was steaming when it came out, but it froze solid the second it hit those guys. It was brutally cold, and they were all bundled up in down jackets and sweaters. The icy water soaked them to the bone, like being tossed into a freezer. "Damn it! That's freezing. I'm gonna die." "Ah, stop with the water, stop," At that point, they'd rather take a beating than endure that frozen torture. Their lips turned purple from the cold, and a few even went into shock right there from the extreme temperature drop. Running on pure instinct, they bolted away from Zhang Yi's place, but even 10 seconds was enough to leave them completely drenched, before they could even make it to the elevator. Their clothes were already frozen stiff. Zhang Yi watched them scatter and then shut off the water. He had thought about teaching them a lesson with a crossbow at first, but reloading took too long, and they could have fired back through the peephole. Flooding them turned out to be way more effective. After Zhang Yi's ice water treatment, they were all shivering with purple lips. They limped back to Chen Zhenghao's place. Chen Zhenghao blew a gasket when he saw them stumbling back in such bad shape. "Where's that little punk? Did you catch him or what?" His boys were scrambling for blankets and sheets to get warm. Their clothes were soaked and frozen solid. More than a dozen guys were fighting over clothes and blankets in the room, but since there weren't enough to go around, they ended up stripping down and huddling together for warmth. It was a pretty weird sight. Chen Zhenghao slammed his fist on the table, furious. "Someone better tell me what the hell is going on." Once they had regained a little body heat, the boys explained the whole story to Chen Zhenghao, their teeth chattering. "Zhang Yi is a total scumbag. He hosed us down with a water pipe. It was unbearable. I don't know how thick his door is, we hammered on it for ages and barely scratched the paint." Chen Zhenghao frowned. He had felt how solid Zhang Yi's door was when he'd knocked himself. Breaking in by force was going to be tough, but then he smirked. "Doesn't matter. Even if they're living in a fortress, everyone has a weakness. And I don't believe he's going to stay holed up in there forever. A few of you keep watch. The second he steps outside, beat him to a pulp." Chen Zhenghao said, his voice dripping with venom. His goons, all hardened thugs, smirked, though their teeth still chattered. Even though they were frozen half to death, they still tried to look tough. But little did they know, Zhang Yi had zero intention of leaving his place. It was hell outside, but his apartment was heaven. Why would he ever trade heaven for hell? After dealing with Chen Zhenghao and his crew, Zhang Yi went back to his games. He knew they weren't going to let it go, but they couldn't break into his home and going outside. Forget it. Zhang Yi wouldn't do that if his life depended on it. Even a 1 in 10,000 chance was too much risk. Life was way too comfortable at home. Later that day, Zhang Yi checked out the scene outside from the window. People were actually out there with shovels, trying to clear the snow. He spotted Uncle Yu, the security guard, a real stand-up guy who was always the first to help. A dozen or so of the younger, more energetic residents were out there too. But Aunt Lin and the rest of the neighborhood committee were nowhere to be seen. They were hacking away at a solid wall of snow 2 or 3 meters high. Zhang Yi knew it was a waste of time. Just clearing a path from the building to the community gate would take all day. And even if they managed that, the roads outside were buried too. That much snow required heavy-duty snowplows to clear, but in the south, they didn't have that kind of equipment. Going outside was just not an option. Plus, they couldn't last long in that kind of cold. Their gear wasn't up to it, and they weren't used to the low temperature. Half an hour outside, and they'd be risking frostbite. Zhang Yi shook his head. Those good-hearted people were really struggling. But Zhang Yi wasn't about to give them advice they didn't ask for. After all, it was their choice, and he was just trying to survive. In the afternoon, Zhang Yi got hungry and pulled out a feast from his pocket dimension. Nothing too fancy, just a plate of lobster, a Wellington steak, a couple of Huangshan biscuits, and a Coke. He had plenty of food stored. Now that he was stuck at home, his routine was completely free. Sleep when he was tired, eat when he was hungry. No need to worry about the time of day. The snow was still coming down hard. Zhang Yi glanced down at the building entrance. The snow-clearing crew had given up and gone home. They had spent hours digging out a small space, which was already covered in snow again. They must have realized that they were fighting a losing battle against nature. Zhang Yi lay on the sofa in his undershirt. The temperature in the room was a pleasant 80 degrees. He turned on the TV and flipped through the channels. Most stations across the country had gone off the air. Only a few provincial channels and CCTV were still broadcasting. They were mostly airing propaganda and encouraging everyone to stay positive. At this moment, our eyes are on Xinjiang. Our leaders are strategizing and directing the final battle against the snowstorm. According to reports, due to a poor response to the snowstorm, the US has seen 100 million people affected and tens of millions dead. The snowstorm situation in our country is under control, and everything is improving. We urge everyone not to panic and to trust in the power of the authorities. Zhang Yi shook his head. The scale of this snowstorm was beyond anything they could imagine. The government was trying its best, but human power was insignificant against nature.